The Cadillac was double parked on a narrow tree-lined street in one of Manhattan's better neighborhoods, blocking cars from exiting their parking spaces. A parking enforcement officer was in the midst of writing a ticket for the caddy. Suddenly came an anguished and angry yell. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The Cadillac's driver, a well-groomed middle-aged man in a business suit, was shouting as he emerged from a laundry with his dry cleaning. "I'm just doing my job. You're double parked," the ticket writer responded with measured calmness. "You can't do this to me. I know the mayor. I'm going to get you fired," the caddy driver threatened, furious. "Why don't you just take the ticket and get out of here before I call the tow truck?" the officer replied evenly. The driver grabbed the ticket, got in his car, and drove away, still muttering. The very best police officers are adept at exercising influence, in the sense of constructively shaping the outcome of an interaction using tact and self-control. Paragons of law enforcement use the least force necessary, though they may make a strong show of force to back it up. They approach volatile people with a professional demeanor, calmly and attentively. And as a result, they have more success at getting people to comply. For example, certain New York traffic cops who use the least force approach report the fewest incidents with angry motorists that escalate into violence. Such officers can simply note how their body reacts to a motorist's disrespect, an ominous sign of a shift in power between the two, and calmly but firmly assert their authority with a professional demeanor. The alternative, letting those gut reactions dictate their response, would lead to meltdown. Strong force, if wisely applied, can be an efficient tactic for resolving, or better, avoiding, conflict. But the skillful use of an implicit threat of physical aggression lies not in the application of force itself, but in neural mechanisms that fine-tune a response to best fit the circumstances. It combines self-control, modulating an aggressive impulse, with empathy, reading the other person to gauge what the least force necessary might be, and with social cognition, recognizing the operative norms in a situation. Educating the underlying neural circuitry has been an unrecognized task of those who train people in the artful use of force, whether civilian or military. As someone becomes increasingly adept in applying the means of violence, a parallel inhibition of aggressive urges becomes essential. In everyday social encounters, we draw on much the same circuitry to mitigate aggression, but to more subtle effect. Achieving constructive influence involves expressing ourselves in a way that produces a desired social result, like putting someone at ease. Artfully expressive people are viewed by others as confident and likable, and in general make favorable impressions. Those adept at deploying influence rely on social awareness to guide their actions. For example, they recognize situations where turning a blind eye may benefit a relationship. It can be counterproductive to signal your empathic accuracy by saying, "I don't turn you on," or "you don't love me." In such moments, simply absorbing such an insight and acting on it tacitly is more prudent. Deciding on the optimal dose of expressivity depends, among other factors, on social cognition, knowing the governing cultural norms for what's appropriate in a given social context. Another example of how social intelligence abilities work synergistically. The muted tones that are best for Beijing will seem too understated in Guadalajara. Tact balances expressivity. Social discretion lets us fit in wherever we are, leaving the fewest untoward emotional ripples in our wake. Concern. Let's go back to those seminary students who were rushing to a building to give a practice sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan. There was a crucial moment for each one in turn when they heard the moans of the man in the doorway they had to pass. Even those who rushed by him may have felt a bit of empathy, but empathy alone matters little if we fail to act. Those students who did stop to help were exhibiting another sign of social intelligence: concern. As we saw in Chapter 4, feeling another's needs can be a prod to activity, thanks to the brain's wiring. For example, when women watched videotapes of a baby crying, those who most strongly caught the baby's sadness showed the biggest frowns, an indicator of empathy. These women not only mirrored the baby's physiology, but had the strongest desire to pick him up and hold him. The more we both empathize with someone in need and feel concern, the greater will be our urge to help them. a link seen wherever people are moved to remedy human suffering. A study of charitable giving done in the Netherlands found that a person's sense of social concern predicted the likelihood that they would donate to the needy. In the world of work, concern that propels us to take responsibility for what needs doing translates into good organizational citizenship. Concerned people are those most willing to take the time and make the effort to help out a colleague. Rather than just focusing on their own work, they understand the need for group cooperation to meet larger objectives. Those who are most physiologically aroused by distress in others, that is, who are highly susceptible to emotional contagion in this range, are also those most moved to help. Conversely, those who are little moved by empathic concern most easily disregard someone else's distress. One longitudinal study found that those 5 to 7-year-olds who were least upset on seeing their own mother's distress were most likely to be antisocial as adults. The researchers suggest that fostering young children's attention to and concern for the needs of others may be an effective strategy for preventing later misbehavior. Simply feeling concern for others does not always suffice. We also need to act effectively. Too many leaders of organizations that have humanitarian goals flounder because they lack basic management skills. They need to be smarter about doing good. Concern takes on more potency when it draws on high road abilities, harnessing expertise for its own ends. Bill and Melinda Gates exemplify such higher levels of concern. They have deployed the best practices of the business world to tackle the devastating health problems of the world's poor, and they also spend time meeting the people they are helping. Mothers in Mozambique whose children are dying of malaria, victims of AIDS in India, which primes their empathy. Concern is the impulse that lies at the root of the helping professions, such as medicine and social work. In a sense, these professions are the public embodiment of concern for those in need, be it the sick or the poor. Those who work in the helping professions thrive when this capacity waxes, but burn out when it wanes. Concern reflects a person's capacity for compassion. Manipulative people can be skilled in other abilities of social intelligence, but they fail here. Deficiencies in this aspect of social facility should most strongly identify antisocial types, who do not care about others' needs or suffering, let alone seek to help them. Educating the low road. Now that we've surveyed the terrain of social intelligence, the question arises, can we improve such essential human talents? Particularly when it comes to low-road capacities, this challenge may seem daunting, but Paul Ekman, the authority on reading emotions from facial expressions, has devised a way to teach people how to improve primal empathy, despite its instantaneous unconscious operation. Ekman's training focuses on micro-expressions, emotional signals that flit across the face in less than a third of a second, the snap of a finger. Because these emotional signals are spontaneous and made unconsciously, they offer a clue as to how a person actually feels at that moment, despite whatever impression she may be trying to project. While a single micro-expression does not inevitably indicate that the person is lying, outright falsehoods usually involve this sort of emotional deceptiveness. The better people are at spotting micro-expressions, the more likely they will detect an attempt to suppress an emotional truth. The embassy interviewer who spotted the look of disgust flitting across the face of the criminal wanting a visa had been trained in Ekman's methods. This skill has special value for diplomats, judges, and police because micro-expressions reveal how a person truly feels at that moment. Then again, lovers, business people, teachers, just about anyone can benefit from reading these affective signals. These automatic and fleeting emotional expressions operate via low-road circuitry, which is distinguished by its automaticity and its quickness. And we need to use the low road to catch the low road, but that requires fine-tuning our capacity for primal empathy. Ekman has devised a CD called the Micro-Expression Training Tool that he claims can help most anyone vastly improve this micro-detective work. By now, tens of thousands of people have gone through his training procedure, which takes less than an hour to complete. I tried it this morning. The first round presents a series of different people's faces, each at first frozen in a neutral look. Then, for a startling wisp of a moment, They flash any of 7 expressions: sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, contempt, or happiness. After each flash, I had to guess which expression I had just witnessed, though as far as I could tell, all I had seen was a blur of movement. The smiles and frowns flash by at a high speed in just a 15th of a second. This whiz-bang rate fits the speed window of the low road, leaving the high road befuddled. Then I went through a series of 3 practice and review sessions that present 60 such tableaus in speeds up to a 30th of a second. After I made each guess, the format allowed me to study each expression in freeze frame, the better to master the nuances that distinguish sadness from surprise, disgust from anger. Even better, it graded each guess I'd made right or wrong, providing the crucial feedback, which we virtually never get in life, that allows eager neural circuits to improve at this slippery task. As I made my guesses, I could occasionally articulate to myself what expression I had seen and why: the flash of teeth indicating a smile, the half smirk of contempt, the widened eyes of fear. But more often than not, my rational mind was baffled, genuinely surprised when what seemed a desperate guess was vindicated as accurate intuition. But when I tried to explain to myself why the blur I had just seen signaled one or another emotion, surely that raised brow means surprise, I usually was wrong. When I trusted my gut, I was more often right. As cognitive science tells us, we know more than we can say. To put it differently, this low-road job goes best when the high road just shuts up. After 20 or 30 minutes of practice sessions, I took the post-test, scoring a respectable 86%, up from 50% on the pre-test. Ekman finds that, like me, most people average around 40 to 50% right on the first try. But after just 20 minutes or so of training, virtually everyone gets 80 to 90% correct. The low road is eminently trainable. But why haven't we learned this already? Because we've never gotten the right feedback before, Ekman told me. The more people train, the better they get. You want to overlearn this skill, Ekman advises, by practicing to perfection. People who have been trained this way, Ekman has found, are more adept at detecting real-life micro-expressions, like the look of abject sadness that flitted across the face of British spy Kim Philby in his last public interview before he fled to the Soviet Union, or the hint of disgust zipping by as Kato Kalin testified at the O.J. Simpson murder trial. Understandably, police interrogators, business negotiators, and a host of others whose professions demand that they detect the disingenuous have flocked to Ekman's training. More to the point here, this crash course for the low road reveals that these neural circuits are hungry to learn. They just need lessons in the language they understand, which has nothing to do with words. For social intelligence, Ekman's program is a model for training people in low-road aptitudes like primal empathy and decoding nonverbal signals. While in the past most psychologists would have assumed that such rapid, automatic, and spontaneous behavior was largely beyond our ability to improve, Ekman shows it is not. A new model of learning, it bypasses the high road and connects directly to the low. Social intelligence reconsidered. In the early years of the 20th century, a neurologist did an experiment with a woman who had amnesia. Her case was so severe that she had to be reintroduced to the doctor every time they met, which was almost daily. One day, the doctor hid a tack in his hand. As usual, he introduced himself to the patient and shook her hand. The tack pricked her skin. He then left, walked back in, and asked the woman if they'd ever met before. She said they had not. But when he again introduced himself and stuck out his hand to shake hers, she held her hand back. Joseph Ledoux, who we met in Chapter 5, tells the tale to make a point about the high road and the low. The woman's amnesia was caused by lesions in the temporal lobe, part of the high road circuitry. Her amygdala, that central node for the low road, was intact. Though her temporal lobe could not remember what had just happened to her, the threat of the tack was imprinted in the circuitry of the amygdala. She did not recognize the doctor, but she knew not to trust him. We can rethink social intelligence in light of neuroscience. The social architecture of the brain intertwines the high and low roads. In intact brains, these two systems work in parallel, both necessary rudders in the social world. Conventional ideas of social intelligence have too often focused on high-road talents like social knowledge or the capacity for extracting the rules, protocols, and norms that guide appropriate behavior in a given social setting. The social cognition school reduces interpersonal talent to this sort of general intellect applied to interactions. Although this cognitive approach has served well in linguistics and in artificial intelligence, it meets its limits when applied to human relationships. A focus on cognition about relationships neglects essential non-cognitive abilities like primal empathy and synchrony, and it ignores capacities like concern. A purely cognitive perspective slights the essential brain-to-brain social glue that builds the foundation for any interaction. The full spectrum of social intelligence abilities embraces both high and low-road aptitudes. Presently, both the concept and its measures omit too many lanes of the low road, and so exclude social talents that have been key to human survival. Back in the 1920s, when Thorndike originally proposed measuring social intelligence, next to nothing was known about the neural basis of IQ, let alone about interpersonal skill. Now, social neuroscience challenges intelligence theorists to find a definition for our interpersonal abilities that encompasses the talents of the low road, including capacities for getting in sync, for attuned listening, and for empathic concern. These basic elements of nourishing relationships must be included in any full account of social intelligence. Without them, the concept remains cold and dry, valuing a calculating intellect but ignoring the virtues of a warm heart. On this point, I stand with the late psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg, who argued that the attempt to eliminate human values from social intelligence impoverishes the concept. Then such intelligence devolves into the pragmatics of influence and control. In these anonymous and isolated times, we need to be ever vigilant against the spread of just that impersonal stance. Part 2. Broken Bonds. Chapter 7. You and It. A woman whose sister had recently died got a sympathy call from a male friend who had lost his own sister a few years before. The friend expressed his condolences, and the woman, touched by his empathic words, told him poignant details of the long illness her sister had suffered, and she described how bereft she herself felt at the loss. But as she talked, she could hear the clicking of computer keys at the other end of the line. A slow realization dawned. Her friend was answering his email even as he was talking to her in her hour of pain. His comments became increasingly hollow, perfunctory, and off-point as the conversation continued. After they hung up, she felt so dejected that she wished he had never called at all. She just had a gut punch of the interaction that the philosopher Martin Buber called I-It. In I-It interaction, Buber wrote, one person has no attunement to the other's subjective reality, feels no real empathy for the other person. The lack of connectedness may be all too obvious from the recipient's perspective. The friend may well have felt obligated to call and express his sympathy to the woman whose sister died, but his lack of a full emotional connection made the call a hollow gesture. Buber coined the term I-It for the range of relations that runs from merely detached to utterly exploitative. In that spectrum, others become objects. We treat someone more as a thing than as a person. Psychologists use the term agentic for this cold approach to others, viewing people solely as instruments to be used toward our own goals. I am agentic when I care not at all about your feelings, but only about what I want from you. The egocentric mode contrasts with communion, a state of high mutual empathy where your feelings do more than matter to me, they change me. While we are in communion, we stay in sync, meshed in a mutual feedback loop. But during moments of agency, we disconnect. When other tasks split our attention, the dwindling reserve left for the person we are talking with leaves us operating on automatic, paying just enough attention to keep the conversation on track. Should more presence be called for, the result will be an interaction that feels off. Multiple preoccupations take a toll on any conversation that goes beyond the routine, particularly when it enters emotionally troubling zones. To be charitable, the multitasking condolence caller may have meant no harm, but when we are multitasking, in that common addiction of modern life, and talking gets added to the mix of our activities, we readily slide into the it mode. I, you. From the next table in a restaurant, I overhear the following tale. My brother has terrible luck with women. His first marriage was a disaster. He's 39 and a nerd. He's got terrific technical skills, but zero social skills. Lately, he's been trying speed dating. Single women sit at tables, and the men go from table to table, spending exactly 5 minutes talking with each woman. A bell rings at 5 minutes, and they rate each other to indicate if they might want to get together. If they do, then they exchange email addresses to arrange a meeting another time. But my brother ruins his chances. I know just what he does. As soon as he sits down, he starts talking about himself nonstop. I'm sure he never asks the woman a single question. He's never had one say she wants to see him again. For the same reason, when she was single, opera singer Alison Charney employed a dating test. She counted the amount of time it took before her date asked her a question with the word you in it. On her first date with Adam Epstein, the man she married a year later, she didn't even have time to start the clock. He aced the test. That test looks for a person's capacity for attuning, for wanting to enter and understand another person's inner reality. Psychoanalysts use the somewhat cumbersome term intersubjectivity to refer to this meshing of two people's inner worlds. The phrase I, you is a more lyrical way of describing the same sort of empathic connection. As the Austrian-born Buber described it in his 1937 book on a philosophy of relationships, I, you, or I and thou, as the phrase entered American popular culture, is a special bond, an attuned closeness that is often, but of course not always, found between husbands and wives, family members, and good friends. In German, the form of you that Buber used, du, is the most intimate, the word friends and lovers use with each other. For Buber, who was a mystic as well as a philosopher, you has a transcendental dimension. The human relationship with the divine is the one I-you connection that can be indefinitely sustained, the ultimate ideal for our imperfect humanity. But the everyday modes of I-you reach from simple respect and politeness to affection and admiration, to any of the countless ways we show our love. The emotional indifference and remoteness of an I-it relationship stands in direct contrast to the attuned I-you. When we are in the I-it mode, we treat other people as means to some other end. By contrast, in the I-you mode, our relationship with them becomes an end in itself. The high road, with its facility and rationality and cognition, may suffice for the it, but the you, where we attune, engages the low road. The boundary between it and you is porous and fluid. Every you will sometimes become an it. Every it has the potential for becoming a you. When we expect to be treated as a you, the it treatment feels terrible, as happened on that hollow phone call. In such moments, you shrivels into it. Empathy opens the door to I-you relations. We respond not just from the surface, but with a wider swath. As Buber put it, I-you can only be spoken with the whole being. A defining quality of I-you engagement is feeling felt, the distinct sensation when someone has become the target of true empathy. At such moments, we sense that the other person knows how we feel, and so we feel known. As one early psychoanalyst put it, client and therapist oscillate in the same rhythm as their emotional connection intensifies. This occurs physiologically, too. Therapeutic empathy, as the humanistic theorist Carl Rogers proposed, is achieved when the therapist attunes to the client to a point where the client feels understood, feels known as a you. Feeling felt. Shortly after Takeo Doi, a Japanese psychiatrist, arrived on his first visit to America, he had an awkward moment. He was visiting the home of someone to whom he had just been introduced, and his host asked Doi if he was hungry, adding, "We have some ice cream if you'd like." Doi was in fact rather hungry, but being asked point blank if he was hungry by someone he hardly knew was jarring. He would never have been asked such a thing in Japan. Following the norms of Japanese culture, Doi could not bring himself to admit his hunger, so he passed up the offer of the ice cream. At the same time, Doi recalls cherishing a mild hope that his host would press him again. He was disappointed to hear his host say, "I see," and drop the offer. In Japan, Doi notes, a host would simply have sensed his hunger and given him something to eat without having to ask if he wanted it. That sensing of another person's needs and feelings, and the unsolicited response to them, bespeaks the high value placed on the I-U mode in Japanese culture, and in East Asian cultures generally. The Japanese word amai refers to this sensibility, empathy that is taken for granted and acted upon without calling attention to itself. In the orbit of amai, we feel felt. Takeo Doi sees the warm connectedness of the mother-infant relationship, in which the mother intuitively senses what the baby needs, as the prototype of this heightened attunement. It extends into every close social tie in Japanese daily life, creating an intimate atmosphere of connectedness. English has no word for amai, but it could certainly use one to refer to such a closely attuned relationship. Amai points to the empirical fact that we attune most readily with the people in our lives we know and love, our immediate family and relatives, lovers or spouses, old friends. The closer we are, the more amai. Amai seems to take for granted a mutual priming of parallel feelings and thoughts in people who are attuned. The unvoiced attitude is something like, "If I feel it, so should you. And so I needn't tell you what I want, feel, or need. You should be closely enough attuned to me to sense it and so to act on it without a word needed." This concept makes not just emotional sense, but cognitive sense as well. The stronger our relationship with someone, the more open and attentive to them we are likely to be. The more personal history we have shared, the more readily we will sense how they feel, and the more similarly we will think about and react to whatever may arise. Buber is passé in philosophical circles these days, but the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas has largely filled his role as a commentator on relationships. I-it, as Levinas observes, implies the most superficial of relationships, thinking about the other person rather than attuning to her. I-it stays on the surface. I-you plunges into the depths. It, Levinas points out, describes you in the third person, just a mere idea, the greatest remove from intimate connection. Philosophers see the implicit understandings of the world that guide how we think and act as invisible moorings in our constructed social reality. This knowledge can tacitly be shared culture-wide, within a family, or in any meeting of minds between people. As Levinas notes, such a shared sensibility is what emerges from two people interacting. Our private, subjective sense of the world has its roots in our relationships. As Freud put it long ago, whatever establishes significant points in common between people arouses fellow feelings, a fact not lost on anyone who has successfully struck up a conversation with an attractive potential partner, made a sales call on a stranger, or simply passed the time with a seatmate on a long plane flight. But beneath this surface connection, Freud saw that intense looping could forge outright identification, a sense that the other and oneself are virtually one and the same. At the neural level, my getting to know you means my acquiring a resonance with your emotional patterns and mental maps. And the more our maps overlap, the more identified we feel, and the greater the shared reality we create. As we grow to identify with each other, the mind's categories undergo a merging of sorts, so that we unconsciously think about those most important to us in very much the same ways we think about ourselves. Husbands and wives, for instance, tend to find it easier to name ways they are similar to each other than the ways they differ, but only if they are happy with each other. If not, the differences loom larger. Another rather ironic indicator of similarity in mental maps occurs with self-serving biases. We tend to apply to those we value most the same distorted thinking we apply to ourselves. We commonly hold, for example, an overly optimistic illusion of invulnerability, in which we see bad things as more likely to happen to other people than to ourselves or to those we care about most. We typically estimate the odds that we or our loved ones will fall prey to cancer or an auto accident as much lower than the odds we estimate for other people. Our experience of oneness, a sense of merging or sharing identities, increases whenever we take someone else's perspective. and it strengthens the more we see things from their point of view. The moment when empathy becomes mutual has an especially rich resonance. Two tightly looped people mesh minds, even smoothly finishing sentences for each other, a sign of a vibrant relationship that marital researchers call high-intensity validation. IU is a unifying relationship in which, for the time being, a special other is perceived as distinct from all others and is known in all her distinctive features. Such deep encounters are the moments we remember most vividly in our close relationships. Buber was referring to just this fully looped engagement when he wrote, "All real living is meeting." Short of sainthood, always to engage absolutely everyone we encounter as a you is to ask too much of ourselves. Ordinary life inevitably swings between the two modes, Buber saw. We have a sort of divided self, two tidily circled off provinces. One it, the other you. You covers our connected moments, but we handle the details of life in the it mode, through utilitarian communications focused on getting things done. The utility of the it. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof has a distinguished record as a journalist and won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative reporting. He has maintained his journalistic objectivity through wars, famines, and most of the major catastrophes of the last few decades. But one day in Cambodia, that detachment melted away. It happened while he was investigating the scandalous sale worldwide of thousands of children as slaves to sex traffickers. The decisive moment came when a Cambodian pimp presented to him a tiny, quivering teenage girl named Srey Neth. Kristof, as he tells it, did something dreadfully unjournalistic. He bought her for $150. Kristof took Srey Neth and another girl back to their villages and set them free, helping them get a new start in their lives. A year later, Srey Neth finished at a beauty school in Phnom Penh and was looking forward to starting her own shop, though tragically, the other girl was drifting back to the easy money. Writing about the girls in his column, Kristof moved numbers of readers to send donations to a charity that has helped Srey Neth and others like her restart their lives. Objectivity is one of the guiding principles of journalistic ethics. Ideally, the journalist remains a neutral observer, tracking events and reporting on them as they happen rather than interfering with them in any way. Kristof had stepped out of the tightly boundaried role of journalist, crossing that gap of detachment to enter the story himself. The journalist's code is a mandate for an I-it relationship, much like the codes held by many other professionals, from doctors to police officers. A surgeon should not operate on someone with whom she has a strong personal relationship, lest her feelings interfere with her mental clarity. A police officer, in theory, should never let a personal connection influence impartial policing. The principle of keeping a professional distance is intended to protect both parties from the wobbly, unpredictable influence of emotions in the execution of their expertise. Maintaining that distance means seeing a person in terms of their role, patient, criminal, without attuning to the person within the role. While the low road connects us instantly to the other person's distress, the prefrontal systems can calm us and increase our emotional separation enough so we can think more clearly. A balance of high and low roads makes empathy effective. The it mode has decided advantages for daily life, if only for getting routine business out of the way. Implicit social rules guide us in deciding which people we need not loop with. Daily life seems rife with them. Anytime we're expected to interact with someone in terms of their social role alone, the waitress, the store clerk, we treat them as a one-dimensional it, ignoring the rest of them, their human identity. Jean-Paul Sartre, the 20th century French philosopher, saw this one-dimensionality as a symptom of a broader alienation in modern life. He described public roles as a ceremony of sorts, a well-scripted way of acting in which we treat others as an it, and are treated as such in return. There is the dance of the grocer, of the tailor, of the auctioneer, by which they endeavor to persuade their clientele that they are nothing but a grocer, a tailor, an auctioneer. But Sartre says nothing of the benefits we derive from avoiding an endless string of IU encounters, thanks to this I-it masquerade. A waiter's dignified aloofness spares him intrusions into his private life and at the same time creates a sphere of privacy for the diners he serves. Staying in his role allows a waiter to get things done efficiently while he retains the internal autonomy to turn his attention to his private interests and pursuits, even if they involve only daydreaming and fantasy. His role provides him with a bubble of privacy even in public life. Making small talk poses no threat to this bubble so long as it remains small, and the person in the it role always has an option to attend to someone as a you, temporarily stepping into full personhood. But generally, the role itself operates as a sort of screen, partially blocking out the person who fills it. At least at first, we see the it, not the person. When we encounter casual acquaintances, our rapport heightens to the degree that we both engage in a nonverbal dance of mutual attention, smiling, coordinating posture and movement, and the like. But when we meet someone in a professional role, we tend to focus on a need or on some desired outcome. Studies of people interacting with those in a formal helping role, physician, nurse, counselor, psychotherapist, show that the standard ingredients of rapport there are notably weaker on both sides than between people in informal encounters. This goal-oriented focus presents a challenge to helping professionals. Rapport, after all, matters for the effectiveness of the professional encounter. In psychotherapy, the interpersonal chemistry between therapist and client determines whether a working alliance will form. In medicine, a good rapport helps the patient trust the physician sufficiently to comply with his recommendations. People in helping professions must work hard to ensure that the ingredients of rapport operate during their professional encounters. Their detachment needs to be balanced with sufficient empathy to allow at least a bit of IU feeling to bloom. The pain of rejection. The moment of truth for Mary Duffy, when she realized that she had ceased being known as a person and was now simply the carcinoma in room B2, came to her the morning after her surgery for breast cancer. Duffy was still half asleep when, without any warning, she was surrounded by white-coated strangers, a doctor and a group of medical students. The doctor, without a word, pulled off her blanket and stripped off her nightgown as though she were just a mannequin, leaving her naked. Too weak to protest, Duffy managed a sarcastic, "Well, good morning," to the doctor, who ignored her. Instead, he launched into a lecture on carcinoma for the gaggle of medical students who circled her bed. They duly stared at her naked body, detachedly indifferent to her. Finally, the doctor deigned to speak directly to Duffy, asking distractedly, "Have you passed gas yet?" When she tried to assert a bit of humanity with a snappy comeback, "No, I don't do that until the third date," the doctor looked offended, as though she had let him down. What Duffy so urgently wanted in that moment was for the doctor to affirm her personhood by even a small gesture that would allow her a bit of dignity. She needed an IU moment. What she got was a cold dose of it. As Duffy was, we are inevitably troubled when someone we expect to loop with for one reason or another fails to take up their half of the circuit. The result? We feel bereft, something like a baby whose mother refuses to pay attention to her. That feeling of hurt has a neural basis. Our brain registers social rejections in the very area that activates when we are hurt physically, the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, which is known to generate, among other things, the distressing sensations of bodily pain. Matthew Lieberman and Naomi Eisenberger, who did the study at UCLA, suggest that the ACC operates as a neural alarm system for detecting the danger of rejection and for alerting other parts of the brain to react accordingly. As such, they opine, it forms part of a social attachment system that piggybacks on the existing wiring for alerting the brain to physical harm. Rejection resonates with a primal threat, one the brain seems designed to highlight. Lieberman and Eisenberger remind us that in human prehistory, being part of a band was essential for survival. Exclusion could be a death sentence, as is still true today for infant mammals in the wild. The pain center, they propose, may have evolved this sensitivity to social exclusion as an alarm signal to warn of potential banishment, and presumably to prompt us to repair the threatened relationship. That idea makes sense of the very metaphors we use to indicate the sting of a rebuff. A broken heart and hurt feelings suggest the physical nature of the emotional ache. This equation of physical and social pain seems tacitly recognized in human speech. In many different languages around the world, the words that describe social pain all borrow from the lexicon of physical hurts. Tellingly, a monkey infant whose ACC is damaged will fail to cry in distress when separated from its mother. Such a failure in nature could easily imperil its life. Likewise, a monkey mother whose ACC has lesions no longer responds to the cries of a distressed infant by gathering it close for protection. In humans, when a mother hears her baby cry, her ACC lights up with activity until she responds. Our ancient need to maintain connection may explain why tears and laughter share proximity in the brainstem, the oldest part of the brain. Laughing and crying come spontaneously in primal moments of social connection, births and deaths, weddings and long-deferred reunions. Distress at separation and joy at bonding both bespeak the primal power of connection. When our need for closeness goes unmet, emotional disorders can result. Psychologists have coined the term social depression for the particular unhappiness caused by troubled, threatened relationships. Social rejection, or fearing it, is one of the most common causes of anxiety. Feelings of inclusion depend not so much on having frequent social contacts or numerous relationships as on how accepted we feel, even in just a few key relationships. Small wonder that we have a hardwired system that is alert to the threat of abandonment, separation, or rejection. These were once actual threats to life itself, though they are only symbolically so today. Still, when we hope to be a you, being treated like an it, as though we do not matter, carries a particularly harsh sting. Empathy or projection. A psychoanalyst recounting his first meeting with a new patient recalled feeling subtly nervous. I vaguely recognized it as one of the many versions of anxiety to which I am susceptible, he told me. What exactly had made him so nervous? Scanning his patient while listening attentively, he realized that the most unsettling detail was that the patient was wearing pants that were crisply creased and wrinkle-free. His patient, as he wryly put it, looked like the main Eddie Bauer catalog entry, and I was the addendum on the back page that stated that odd sizes and seconds were available on inquiry. The analyst felt so unnerved that he leaned forward in his chair, never breaking eye contact, to pull down the cuffs of his own totally wrinkled chinos. Later, the patient recounted a powerful memory of his mother's expression of stern and silent disapproval. That rang a bell with the analyst, who himself recalls repeated exhortations by his own mother to wear pressed slacks. The psychoanalyst cited that moment to exemplify the crucial role in therapy of finely attuned empathy. Those moments, as he put it, when the therapist feels on target with the patient, accurately sensing what feelings are roiling through the patient. Unfortunately, part of what the analyst feels comes from his own emotional baggage, a projection of his own inner reality onto that of the patient. Projection ignores the other person's inner reality. When we are projecting, we assume the other feels and thinks as we do. This tendency was noted long ago by the 18th century philosopher David Hume, who observed a remarkable inclination in human nature to bestow on other people the same emotions we observe in ourselves, and to find everywhere those ideas which are most present to us in our own minds. In full-fledged projection, though, we simply map our world onto someone else's with no fit or attunement whatsoever. People who are self-absorbed, lost in their own inner world, have little choice but to project that sensibility onto whomever they perceive. Some argue that every act of empathy entails a subtle sort of projection, that tuning in to someone else triggers in ourselves feelings and thoughts that we can readily, though mistakenly, attribute to them. The analyst's challenge is to distinguish her own projections, technically the counter-transference, from genuine empathy. To the degree that a therapist is aware of which of her inner feelings mirror the patient's and which come instead from her own history, she can sort out what the patient actually feels. If projection makes the other an it, empathy sees the other as a you. Empathy creates a feedback loop as we work toward a fit between our perception and the other person's reality. The therapist, monitoring his own reactions, might first note a feeling in his own body that did not originate there. The feeling arises from what he senses in the patient. Its meaning will emerge as it recurs, passed back and forth as the client-therapist relationship builds. By sharing that inner sense, he can reflect the other person's experience back to her, as empathy sharpens its attunement. Our sense of well-being depends, to some extent, on others regarding us as a you. Our yearning for connection is a primal human need, at the very least as a cushion for survival. Today, the neural echo of that need heightens our sensitivity to the difference between it and you, and makes us feel social rejection as deeply as physical pain. If being treated as an it unnerves us so, then those who always regard others as such are particularly disturbing. Chapter 8. The Dark Triad. My brother-in-law, Leonard Woolf, is a gentle and caring man by nature, a Chaucer scholar by training, and also an expert in the terror and horror genres in film and literature. Those interests brought him some years ago to consider writing a book about a real-life serial killer. The man had murdered 10 people, including 3 of his own family members, before being caught. The murders were horrifyingly intimate. He strangled his victims. Leonard visited the murderer in prison several times. Finally, he worked up the courage to ask the one question that most intrigued him. How could you do such a terrible thing to people? Didn't you feel any pity for them? To which the killer replied very matter-of-factly, "Oh, no, I had to turn that part of me off. If I had felt any of their distress, I couldn't have done it." Empathy is the prime inhibitor of human cruelty. Withholding our natural inclination to feel with another allows us to treat the other as an it. That strangler's chilling phrase, "I had to turn that part of me off," alludes to the human capacity for intentionally capping off our empathy, for turning a cold eye and ear to another's plight. Suppressing our natural inclination to feel with another unleashes cruelty. When being tuned out of caring is a person's defining trait, they typically belong to one of the types that psychologists dub the dark triad: narcissists, Machiavellians, and psychopaths. All 3 types share to varying degrees an unappealing, though sometimes well-concealed core: social malevolence and duplicity, self-centeredness and aggression, and emotional coldness. We would do well to familiarize ourselves with the hallmarks of this threesome, if only to better recognize them. Modern society, glorifying me-first motives and worshiping celebrity demigods of greed unleashed and vanity idealized, may be inadvertently inviting these types to flourish. Most people who fall into the dark triad do not qualify for a psychiatric diagnosis, though at their extremes they shade into mental illness or become outlaws, particularly psychopaths. But the far more common subclinical variety live among us, populating offices, schools, bars, and the routine byways of daily life. The narcissist dreams of glory. A football player whom we'll call Andre has a justified reputation as flashy. He's adored for making tough, spectacular plays at crucial moments in important games. Andre does his best when the crowds roar loudest, when the spotlight shines, and when the stakes are highest. When the game is on the line, one teammate told a reporter, "We're happy to have Andre on the team." But that same teammate also added, "Andre is a real pain in the neck. He's chronically late to practice and struts around like he's God's gift to football, and I don't think I've ever seen him throw a decent block for another player." Moreover, Andre has a habit of blowing easy plays, especially in practice or in games with little significance. And on one infamous occasion, he nearly got into a fight with a teammate who passed the ball to another player instead of to Andre, even though the other player scored. Andre embodies garden-variety narcissism. Such people are driven by one motive: dreams of glory. Narcissists, though bored by routine, flourish when they are facing a difficult challenge. This trait is highly adaptive in domains where performance under stress counts, from litigation to leadership. The healthy variety of narcissism originates in the well-loved infant's notion that she is the center of the world, that her needs are everyone else's priority. In adulthood, this same attitude matures into a positive self-regard that gives her confidence appropriate to her level of talent, an essential ingredient for success. Lacking such self-confidence, people shrink from deploying whatever gifts or strengths they may have. Whether a given narcissist is healthy or unhealthy can be gauged by their capacity for empathy. The more impaired the person's ability to consider others may be, the less healthy is their narcissism. Many narcissists are drawn to pressured, high-profile jobs where they can use their talents well and the potential laurels are great, despite any risks. Like Andre, they make their best effort when a grand payoff beckons. In the business world, such narcissists can end up as larger-than-life leaders. Michael Maccabee, a psychoanalyst who has studied and treated narcissistic leaders, observes that the type has become increasingly common at the top echelons of business today as competitive tensions, as well as executive pay and glamour, have escalated. Such ambitious and self-confident leaders can be extraordinarily effective in the present cutthroat business world. The best are gifted, creative strategists who can grasp the big picture and navigate risky challenges to leave a positive legacy. Productive narcissists combine a justified self-confidence with openness to criticism, at least to criticism that comes from confidants. Healthy narcissistic leaders have the ability for self-reflection and are open to reality checks. They develop a sense of perspective and can be playful even as they pursue their goals. Open to new information, they are more likely than others to make sound decisions and are less likely to be blindsided by events. But unhealthy narcissists crave to be admired more than to be loved. Among their strengths are the ability to offer compelling visions and a knack for attracting followers. Often innovators in business, they are driven to achieve, not because they have a high internal standard of excellence, but because they want the perks and glory that achievement brings. Caring little about how their actions affect others, they're free to pursue their goals aggressively, regardless of the human costs. In times of great turbulence, Maccabee proposes, such leaders can seem attractive, if only because they have the audacity to push through programs that bring radical changes. But such narcissists empathize selectively, turning a blind eye to those who do not feed their striving for glory. They can close or sell a company or lay off multitudes of employees without feeling an ounce of sympathy for those for whom those decisions are personal disasters. In the absence of empathy, they have no regrets and are indifferent to the needs or feelings of their employees. A feeling of self-worth is another sign of a healthy narcissism. Unhealthy narcissists typically lack such a feeling. The result is an inner shakiness that in a leader, for example, means that even as he unfurls inspiring visions, he harbors a vulnerability that closes his ears to criticism. Such leaders avoid even constructive feedback, which they perceive as an attack. Their hypersensitivity to criticism in any form also means that narcissistic leaders don't seek out information widely. Rather, they selectively seize on data that supports their views, ignoring disconfirming facts. They don't listen, but prefer to preach and indoctrinate. While some narcissistic leaders get spectacular results, others create disasters. When they harbor unrealistic dreams, lacking any restraint, and ignoring wise counsel, they drag a company down the wrong track. Given the large number of narcissistic leaders at the helm of companies today, Maccabee warns, organizations must find ways to force leaders to listen and take others' views into account. Otherwise, such leaders will likely stay isolated behind a wall of sycophants who will be supportive no matter what. One narcissistic CEO came to Maccabee for psychotherapy to learn why he so readily flew into rages at the people who worked for him. He would take even helpful suggestions as slights and turn on whoever had made them. The CEO traced his anger to childhood feelings of being unappreciated by his aloof father. No matter what he accomplished, his father was unimpressed. The CEO realized that now he sought emotional restitution in the form of unstinting praise from his employees and that he needed to hear it in abundance. But when he felt underappreciated, he became enraged. With that insight, the CEO began to change, even learning to laugh at his craving for applause. At one point, he announced to his top team that he was in psychoanalysis and asked what they thought. There was a long pause. Then one executive worked up the courage to say that he didn't seem as angry anymore, so whatever he was doing, he should keep it up. The dark side of loyalty. My students, a business school professor confides, understand organizational life as a kind of Vanity Fair. in which those who want to get ahead can do so by playing to the vanity of their superiors. One plays this game, his students know, by using outright flattery and adulation. Even sycophancy, they believe, will lead to promotions, if in the process they have to withhold, downplay, or distort important information, so be it. Through guile and with a bit of luck, the hard consequences of that suppression will fall on someone else's watch. That cynical attitude goes to the heart of the danger of unhealthy narcissism in organizational life. An entire organization can be narcissistic. When a critical mass of employees share a narcissistic outlook, the outfit itself takes on those traits, which become standard operating procedures. Organizational narcissism has clear perils. Pumping up grandiosity, whether it is the boss's or some false collective self-image held throughout the company, becomes the operating norm. Healthy dissent dies out, and any organization that is cheated of a full grasp of truth loses the ability to respond nimbly to harsh realities. To be sure, every company wants its employees to be proud they work there and to feel that they share a meaningful mission. A bit of well-founded collective narcissism is healthy. Trouble creeps in when that pride builds on a desperate grasp for glory rather than on real accomplishment. Trouble grows when narcissistic leaders expect to hear only messages that confirm their own sense of greatness. And when those leaders turn against bearers of bad news, subordinates naturally start to ignore data that do not fit the grandiose image. This skewed filter on reality need not be cynically motivated. Employees who themselves gain ego inflation from belonging will bend the truth willingly in exchange for the rosy feelings of group self-adulation. A poignant casualty of such malignant group narcissism is not just truth, but authentic connection among coworkers. Everyone tacitly colludes to maintain their shared illusions. Suppression and paranoia thrive. Work devolves to a charade. In a prescient scene in the 1983 movie Silkwood, Karen Silkwood, a crusader against corporate corruption, watches a manager at a manufacturing plant retouch photos of welds on fuel rods that are headed for nuclear reactors. He's making dangerously faulty work seem safe. The manager seems to harbor no second thoughts about his potentially lethal chore. He's just worried that the plant's late delivery of the fuel rods might hurt business and so endanger the people who work there. He thinks of himself as a good corporate citizen. In the years since that movie was made, we have seen a series of actual meltdowns like those the scene implicitly warns against. Not of nuclear reactors, but Chernobyls of entire corporations. Beneath the outright lies and elaborate fiscal cover-ups, these companies arguably shared a single root affliction: collective narcissism. Narcissistic organizations implicitly encourage such duplicity, even while ostensibly asking for candor and hard data. Shared illusions flourish in direct proportion to the suppression of truth. When narcissism spreads within a company, then those who challenge the self-flattery, even with crucial information, threaten all those who count on the narcissistic high with a deflating feeling of failure or shame. In the psyche of the narcissist, the knee-jerk response to such a threat is rage. In a narcissistic company, those who imperil the group's grandiosity are typically demoted, upbraided, or fired. The narcissistic organization becomes a moral universe of its own, a world where its goals, goodness, and means are not questioned but taken as holy writ. It's a world where doing whatever we need to get whatever we want seems perfectly fine. The ongoing self-celebration fogs over how divorced from reality we've become. The rules don't apply to us, just to the others. The narcissist's motto: others exist to adore me. She had promised to read him a pornographic passage from a novel, but now he was furious. At first, everything seemed fine. She began reading to him in a low, seductive tone from a titillating scene about two lovers. He could feel himself getting a bit aroused. But as the passage grew steamier, she grew nervous, alternately stuttering and hesitant, then plunging ahead in rapid chunks. She was clearly flustered. Finally, it was just more than she could handle. Pleading that the passage was just too pornographic after this point, she refused to read on. To make matters worse, she added that something about him made her too uncomfortable to continue. Worse still, she admitted she had gone ahead and read the whole passage for other guys. That scene was played out 120 times. each time with a different man, as a part of an experiment at an unnamed university. The woman reading the steamy prose was an assistant in a study of what provokes some men, but not most others, to force sex on women. The scenario was set up deliberately to prod men first to feel aroused, then to feel frustrated and put down. After that setup, each man had a chance for retribution. He was asked to rate the woman's performance, to set how much she should be paid or whether her pay should be withheld, and to decide if she should be asked back or fired. Most of the men forgave the woman, especially when they heard she needed the money to pay her tuition. But, true to type, those with narcissistic tendencies were outraged by the slights and retaliated most. The narcissists, feeling they had been cheated of something to which they were entitled, were punitive on every count. And on a test of attitudes about sexual coercion, the more narcissistic the man, the more he approved of coercive tactics. Had this been a date where the couple made out and then the woman wanted to stop, the researchers concluded such men were most likely to force sex on her despite her protests. Even unhealthy narcissists can sometimes be charmers. The very name comes from the Greek myth of Narcissus, who was so entranced by his own beauty that he fell in love with his own image reflected in a lake. The nymph Echo also fell in love with him, but she ended up spurned and heartbroken, unable to compete with his self-adoration. As the myth suggests, many narcissists attract people because the self-confidence they exude can lend them a charismatic aura. Though they are quick to put others down, unhealthy narcissists view themselves in absolutely positive terms. They are understandably happiest in a marriage with someone who will be unfailingly fawning. The slogan of the narcissist might be, "Others exist to adore me." Among the dark triad, narcissists alone are blatant in their self-inflation and braggadocio, leavened with a necessary dose of self-deception. Their bias is firmly self-serving. They take credit for successes but never blame for failure. They feel entitled to glory, even blithely claiming credit for others' work. But they see nothing wrong in this, nor in anything else they might do. According to one standard test, a narcissist is someone who has a grandiose sense of self-importance, harbors obsessive fantasies of unbounded glory, feels rage or intense shame when criticized, expects special favors, and lacks empathy. That deficiency in empathy means narcissists remain oblivious to the self-centered abrasiveness that others see in them so clearly. Although they can selectively turn on the charm, narcissists can just as readily be disagreeable. Not in the least drawn to emotional intimacy, they are highly competitive, cynical, and mistrustful of others, and readily exploit the people in their lives, glorifying themselves even at the expense of slighting someone close to them. Nonetheless, narcissists typically think of themselves as likable. Unrealistic self-inflation comes more readily in cultures that encourage individualistic striving rather than shared success. Collective cultures, prevalent in East Asia and Northern Europe, place a premium on harmonizing with the group and sharing both work and credit for success while giving up expectations of being treated as special. But individualistic cultures like the United States and Australia tend to encourage striving for the glory of individual accomplishment and its rewards. Accordingly, American college students see themselves as better than two-thirds of their fellows in most endeavors, while Japanese students rate themselves exactly in the middle. The Machiavellian. My ends justify the means. The manager of a large division at a European industrial giant had an oddly split reputation. The people working for him feared and loathed him, while his boss found him utterly charming. Highly polished socially, the manager made considerable efforts to impress not just his boss, but also clients outside the company. But once he was back in his own office suite, he became a petty tyrant, shouting at people whose performance displeased him, while uttering not a word of praise for those who excelled. A consultant called in by the industrial company to evaluate its managers realized how demoralized the people in this autocrat's division had become. After only a few interviews of his coworkers, she saw that he was clearly self-centered, caring only about himself rather than about the organization or even the people whose hard work made him seem so praiseworthy to his own boss. The consultant recommended that he be replaced, and the company CEO rather reluctantly asked him to leave. The manager, though, found another high-level job immediately, because he made such a good first impression on his new boss. We instantly recognize this manipulative manager. We've seen him in countless movies, plays, and television dramas. The stereotype of the cad, the unfeeling but smooth villain who ruthlessly exploits, pervades popular culture. The type stands as a perennial staple of popular entertainment. He's as old as the demon Ravana in the ancient Indian epic the Ramayana, as contemporary as the evil emperor in the Star Wars saga. In endless cinema incarnations, he reappears as the mad scientist bent on world rule or the charming yet callous leader of a criminal gang. We instinctively loathe the type because of his unscrupulous cunning, his wile in the service of evil ends. He's the Machiavellian, the villain we love to hate. When Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince, the 16th century manual for seizing and holding political power through cunning manipulation, he took for granted that the aspiring ruler had only his own interests at heart, caring not at all about the people he ruled nor those he crushed to gain power. For the Machiavellian, the ends justify the means, no matter what human pain he may cause. That ethic prevailed among Machiavelli's fans in the hothouse of royal courts for centuries, and of course it continues unabated in many contemporary political and business circles. Machiavelli's assumption was that self-interest is the sole driving force in human nature. Altruism nowhere enters the picture. To be sure, a political Machiavellian may in fact not consider his ends to be selfish or evil. He may come up with a convincing rationale, even one he believes. Every totalitarian ruler, for instance, justifies his own tyranny as needed to protect the state from some sinister enemy, even if only a concocted one. The term Machiavellian, or the shorthand Mach, is used by psychologists to apply to people whose outlook on life reflects just this cynical anything-goes attitude. The first test for Machs was actually based on statements from Machiavelli's books, like, "The biggest difference between most criminals and other people is that the criminals are stupid enough to get caught," and "Most people forget more easily the death of their parents than the loss of their property." The psychological inventory makes no moral judgments, and in contexts ranging from sales and diplomacy to politics, the talents of the Mach, including a glib charm, cunning, and confidence, may be desirable assets. On the other hand, Machs tend to be cynically calculating and arrogant, readily behaving in ways that undermine trust and cooperation. Though perhaps admirably cool-headed in their social interactions, they remain uninterested in establishing emotional connections. Machs, like narcissists, see others in strictly utilitarian terms, as an it to manipulate for their own ends. For instance, one confided to a counselor in matter-of-fact tones that he had just fired his girlfriend. He saw people in all realms of life much as interchangeable parts, one as good as another. The Mach shares many traits with the other two branches of the dark triad, such as a disagreeable nature and selfishness. But far more than the narcissist or psychopath, the Mach remains realistic about himself and others, neither making inflated claims nor striving to impress. The Mach prefers to see things clearly, all the better to exploit them. In human prehistory, some evolutionary theorists argue human intelligence first emerged as such crafty operation in the service of one's own interests. In mankind's earliest eras, runs this argument, victory lay in displaying just enough deviousness to get a lion's share without getting booted out of the group. Today, Machiavellian types like the kiss-up, kick-down manager may well gain some personal success, but in the long run, Machs run the risk that their poisoned relationships and resulting bad reputation may one day derail them. A Mach's personal history inevitably will be littered with resentful ex-friends, ex-lovers, and ex-business associates, all brimming with hurt or simmering resentment. Still, a highly mobile society may offer a receptive ecological niche for Machs, where they can readily move on to new conquests far enough afield from the last that their misdeeds never catch up with them. Machs typically have tunnel vision empathy. They can bring someone's emotions into focus mainly when they wish to use that person for their own ends. Otherwise, Machs are generally poorer at empathic attunement than others. The coldness of the Mach seems to result from this core deficit in processing emotions, both in themselves and in others. They see the world in rational, probabilistic terms that are not only devoid of emotions, but absent the ethical sense that flows from human concern. Hence, their easy fall into villainy. Lacking the full capacity to feel with others, mocks also cannot feel for them. Like that serial killer, a part of them has been turned off. Mocks appear just as confused when it comes to their own emotions. At a moment of unease, they may not know whether, as one expert put it, they are feeling sad, tired, hungry, or ill. Mocks appear to experience their emotionally dry inner world as rife with compelling primal needs for sex, money, or power. The mock's predicament comes down to how to fulfill those drives with an interpersonal toolkit that lacks a crucial range of emotional radar. Even so, their selective capacity for sensing what someone might be thinking can be quite incisive, and they seem to rely on this social cunning to make their way in the world. Mocks become astute students of an interpersonal world they can penetrate only at the surface. Their shrewd social cognition notes nuances and figures out how people might react to a given situation. These abilities allow their legendary social slickness. As we've seen, some current definitions of social intelligence, based mainly on such social savvy, would give mocks high marks. But while their head knows what to do, their heart remains clueless. Some see this combination of strength and weakness as a disability mocks overcome through self-serving cunning. Their manipulativeness, in this view, compensates for their blindness to the full range of emotion. That sorry adaptation poisons their relationships. The psychopath. Other as object. During a therapy group in a hospital, the discussion turned to the food in the cafeteria. Some mentioned how good the desserts were, others how fattening the food was. One just hoped there wouldn't be the same old thing again. But Peter's thoughts went in another direction. He wondered how much money was in the cash register, how many staff might be between him and the exit, and how far he would have to get before he could find a chick and have a good time. Peter was in the hospital because of a court order that had been issued when he violated parole. Since his teen years, Peter had abused drugs and alcohol, often becoming belligerent and physically threatening. His present conviction was for making harassing phone calls. Before that, he had been charged with damaging property and malicious injury. He freely admitted stealing from his family and friends. Peter's diagnosis was that of a psychopath, or antisocial personality disorder, as the Psychiatric Diagnostic Manual labels the problem these days. Sociopath has also had its vogue as the term of choice. No matter the name, its hallmarks are deceit and a reckless disregard for others. A psychopath's consistent irresponsibility begets no remorse, only indifference to the emotional pain others may suffer. Peter, for example, found utterly foreign the idea that others could be hurt emotionally by what he did. In family conferences, when his mother talked about the anguish he had caused his family, Peter was surprised, becoming defensive, calling himself the victim. He could not see how he had used his family and friends for his own ends, nor recognize the pain he had caused them.